I guess for me the big question is risk the right word to use in the context of architecture? It's been so synonymous with gambling, chance, recklessness that the skill and intellect of the risk taker has been lost and its truer meaning has become obscured. So it's a word that needs to be reclaimed. In 2009, at Obama's first presidential address, he talked of the risk takers, the doers and the makers of things as the pioneers of the US who brought prosperity and freedom. But by then, risk was already on unstable ground. It was becoming a casualty of the subprime mortgage crisis along with Lehman Brothers. Risk was hubris. Risk is viewed by clients and the public as a scary prospect, to be feared rather than admired. Yet the demand for the unique, the bespoke and the context-driven hasn't changed. So as an architect, you're almost obliged to take risks. The paradox is then that everyone wants the benefits of risk, but with fail-safe guarantees. For me, risk is exciting because it's about progress and exploration. It involves intuition and a desire to advance the debate, as well as extreme technical commitment. In architecture, things can and will go wrong, so you need to prepare for that possibility and to find ways to retrieve success from failure. You could argue that sometimes risk is just doing it first. I'm going to try and illustrate through a number of projects how I've confronted, battled and managed risk. From the start, when we were Future Systems, we were keen to challenge the status quo. This bridge in Canary Wharf was the first civilian floating bridge when it was completed in 1996. By creating a low floating structure, we placed emphasis on the horizontal stretch of water rather than the vertical dominance of Canary Wharf. The ambition was for the lightest possible touch, and you can't get much lighter than simply floating on water. Prefabrication allowed us to de-risk the project somewhat, and when it was completed on time and under budget, it also de-risked Future Systems, as people could see our ability to realise projects. The media centre at Lord's Cricket Ground was a litany of firsts. Our aim was not, nor has it ever been, to challenge technical boundaries simply because they exist. Our projects are always the result of the balance between form and function. At Lord's, the transformation of a complex brief into an elegant solution that captured the public imagination was made possible by a marriage of technical and conceptual inventiveness. We created a design to respect and savour the essential nature of Lord's, but also a design that spoke of modernity. It was a vision that our clients supported, even if sometimes they were a little unsure of what we were doing. As the first semi-monocoque building, it represented a breakthrough, not just in the creation of this new three-dimensional aesthetic, but also in its method of construction. The building was built and fitted out not by the construction industry, but by a boatyard, using the very latest advances in boat building technology to create the enclosing skin of a smooth, white, seamless shell. Without realising it at the time, we had designed the first all-aluminium building in the world, which also meant we had to rework building codes to satisfy the fire regulations. Sometimes you need to prove that you're not wrong, you're just early. At Selfridges in Birmingham, our ambition was not only to design a state-of-the-art department store, but to create a landmark for the city so that the building itself would become a catalyst for change. The plan traces the line of the site and then pushes beyond the pavement line to maximise floor area. What was not obvious was how to clad this three-dimensional form on a developer's budget. Finding a means of cladding this curvaceous volume, we took inspiration from fashion. But our real clue came from history. This amazing Baroque church in Naples uses the device of complexity through repetition, playing with light and shadow to break down a massive volume. We reinterpreted this as a skin made up of thousands of aluminium discs. Unlike Lord's, this was not technically complex, but it was a very different way of looking at cladding. We didn't think it was risky, but certainly others did. Persuading the client to go with a totally bespoke cladding system was not easy, but the discs have become an important part of the identity and iconography of the project. The proportions of most bridges are long and slender, but the Spencer Dock Bridge across the Royal Canal in Dublin is almost wider than it is long. Designed to span only 40 metres, it takes trams, traffic and pedestrians across the docklands. We wanted to exploit these unusual proportions by treating the bridge as a piece of landscape, as a surface rather than a structure. So we had to find a construction technique that would allow us to exaggerate the thinness of the horizontal surface. At the time we were designing the bridge, we were also working on a piece of furniture with a company who produced high-density polystyrene, which we CNC cut to create the structure for the bench. This same technique, using polystyrene blocks as permanent formwork, created the desired slenderness for the bridge and proved to be an extraordinarily fast method of construction. This innovative use of CNC cut polystyrene is to date the largest application of the material to be used in this way. The result is a soft geometry with fluid lines and undulating concrete surfaces that allows the bridge to merge with the piers in a single movement. The construction method enabled us to complete ahead of schedule and under budget. Risky doesn't always have to mean expensive in terms of time or money. There was risk here as to whether we could even make a project out of this building. So I was reluctant to take it on, but we did, so we had to find the potential behind what was a very pragmatic brief to add 3 floors of offices. We needed to be ambitious about the impact that a modest extension could have on the urban context and find a way to give presence to a narrow alley. The billowing form appears intuitive, but it is in fact a response to the very real constraints of the site. A lack of daylight, an unprepossessing building, and the first 2 floors being by default a blank facade because they hide the storage belonging to Bershka. But we're at our best when we have resistance, so we oversailed the site above pavement level to let in maximum daylight and created more space by doing so, and then created impact. We once again transferred technology from the boat building industry, but rather than use aluminium to create a seamless skin as we did at Lord's, we used a system of aluminium profiles used in the production of high-quality ship hulls. But to do this, we had to persuade the builders to warrant the system because we wanted to curve the sheets the opposite way from their system. The altered curvature works well technically and aesthetically and reflects the city back to itself. A project that may appear to be riddled with risk and over-ambition when viewed from the outside may not always be the case. This subway station for Naples, a collaboration with Anish Kapoor, reimagines the station as a piece of public art, expressing the tension between form and function, between art and architecture. And yet our intent and proposals were entirely bought into by the client. Even though there were storms, and no project is straightforward, and no project in Italy is without terrible bureaucracy, these were relatively minor and weathered in the early days of the project. We managed to hold on to the integrity of the idea while resolving all of the hugely demanding technical and complex constraints of a public station. It was this idea of resistance as a positive force that I think is the fundamental difference between art and architecture. We brought our confidence and expertise from working with boat builders at Lords and Hills Place so that the design of the entrances fabricated in Holland was relatively risk-free. The pieces were assembled, signed off and crated up ready for shipment to Naples, but then a new mayor arrived and the spectre of corruption within the municipality brought the project to a halt. The contractors went bankrupt, so the entrances remain in the boatyard. The site was occupied by the construction workers because they hadn't been paid. And the next station has yet to be built, so for now it's a line to nowhere. Construction has been going on for so long that moss has grown over the exposed concrete piles, but when the project resumes, we intend to keep the moss to illustrate and memorialise the painful birth of the project. The risk in this case was not in our design, but the result of a fragile and overly bureaucratic political system. We took a calculated risk in this project in going way outside the brief. The competition brief for the Louvre was to improve the visitor experience by addressing the congestion at the point of entry. MPavilion pyramid was designed to deal with only a fraction of the number of people who visit the museum today. We instinctively understood that the solution did not lie in the pyramid, but at the threshold of entering the museum. So we argued that you should enter through the original palace entrances. And in this way, we could liberate Pei's beautiful pyramid. However, this understanding lost us the competition. In the client's eyes, we were not playing the game. We'd gone way too far by delivering what we felt the Louvre needed rather than what the client asked for. We lost the competition, but we rescued success from failure, because for us it was a very important piece of conceptual thinking that we have gone on to successfully develop in other projects. What we learned fed directly into our proposals for the competition for the V&A in Exhibition Road. Accidents, chance encounters, intuition, twists of fate are as much a part of the design process as logic or forensic analysis. Each project is unique in its complexities, and there's no better example than the V&A. The brief called for a vast new gallery space to be created below ground and for a new entrance off Exhibition Road and the creation of a new courtyard above the gallery. So our first move was to reimagine the dialogue between street and museum by breaking down the barrier between the two and allowing people to drift in off the street to use the new courtyard space. But to be able to make this realisable, we had to address the issue of the Grade 1 listed Aston Webb screen, which created an opaque barrier between Exhibition Road and the museum. The screen was originally designed to hide the boiler rooms, which have long since gone, so we argued its purpose was no longer to conceal, but to reveal the fabulous elevations of the V&A. We took a massive risk in proposing a radical alteration to a Grade 1 listed building. But by opening up the screen and blurring the threshold and taking the museum into the courtyard, we'd unlocked something. It was a risk that ultimately won us the competition. That the major intervention will be below ground is something of a paradox, and in seeking to resolve this paradox, we came up with a notion of making visible the invisible that's directed our thinking at every level in this project. Sometimes, in architecture, a very abstract notion can drive a physical form, and that's been the case in this project. We've created, in effect, an outdoor room with a fabulous cafe in the sun, but it's more than that. It gives you an intuitive understanding of the museum. The V&A's mission is to be didactic throughout its buildings and its collection, and we want to continue this tradition by revealing the very structure that supports the courtyard and that's also the roof of the new gallery space below. We took another risk. Counter to the brief, we let daylight into the galleries. We designed an oculus which is conceptualised as an empty museum vitrine, revealing the gallery roof structure supporting the courtyard. The inside face of the structure is lined with red aluminium to look like the red velvet lining of an old-fashioned vitrine, and through the gaps in the structure you can see the void of the gallery below. This project is a huge technical challenge. We're digging a hole 15 metres below ground, piling 40 metres down within a metre of a Grade 1 listed building, and underpinning a wing of the V&A and its collection as we go. Cambridge University was so fascinated by the challenge that they have installed fibre optic monitoring systems into the tension piles purely for research, so that tension reduction and uplift can be monitored. The findings will determine if traditional models based on elastic theory accurately represent reality. The results could have repercussions on building sites across the world and perhaps make them just a little bit less risky. Descending 15 metres below ground can be very disorientating, but we framed views to give you an understanding of where you've come from in relation to the rest of the museum. We've created two stairs that slide past each other, one to go up and the other to go down. It's a piece of theatre, partly to deal with the number of visitors, but also to ensure that you exit through the shop and you don't enter through it. We've used daylight to draw you down below ground, and at the bottom of the stairs there's a magic moment where there's more daylight than at the top. The expression of the ceiling derives entirely from its function of spanning 38 metres, but it also follows in the neo-Gothic and neoclassical museological tradition of ornate ceilings. The structure of the gallery's ceiling was driven by the change of level in the courtyard, which led us to think of the structure as a folded plate. As you leave the exhibition space by a different stair, you see the Henry Cole wing reflected in the balustrade before you enter into a new space that we've created through the efficiencies of the folded structure. In the section, you can see the space that we've made between the structure and the courtyard, and you're released into this lofty, light-filled space, where you have fantastic views of the recently cleaned sgraffito wall, which had previously been hidden from public view. We've used the structural solution of the roof to generate the pattern of the courtyard surface. It's a subtle but readable expression of what's below. On the left is the structure that resolves the level difference between street and courtyard, and on the right is the pattern. The relation between the two is symbiotic. As the structure deepens, the pattern compresses, and as the structure becomes more shallow, the pattern opens up. So the pattern reads as an abstract expression of the structure, a palpable reflection of the dramatic space below. It also reads more as a colour field than as a series of tiles. An examination of the V&A's ceramic collection and the ceramics embedded in the building itself became our starting point for the design's narrative. To create something that reflects the didactic ethos of the museum and marries art with industry, we set out to explore the limits of ceramics and contextualise it in the design of the courtyard. But to achieve what we'd imagined required a huge degree of research, and research requires faith because the result is not yet known. It's really quite difficult to say to a publicly funded body such as the V&A, "Trust me," but that's what we've done. This certainly tested, but it also deepened our relationship with the V&A. The research was much more complex and took longer than we'd envisaged, but I'm always going to be grateful to the V&A for their unequivocal support, and it's the one occasion where I've actually relished the slower pace of working with a museum. We collaborated with manufacturers from 3 European cities, each with an extraordinary history and the dedication to take risks. When the ceramics industry departs from standardised volume production, development follows a more artisanal line in which accidents and difference are prerequisites of advancement. It's a process of shared learning that relies on trust and mutual respect. We ask a lot from our partners, and it's a privilege to work with people who share a desire to explore. After 2 years of research and testing, we've been rewarded with a beautiful set of tiles that represents a huge step forward for what will be the first porcelain courtyard in the world. While working on the Exhibition Road project, we were commissioned by the London Design Festival and American Hardwood Council to create an installation at the entrance to the V&A. It is the product of its contextual response to the ornateness of the V&A structure. It brings the expression of material, structure and public engagement into a single piece. It doesn't make distinctions between structure and aesthetic, structure and message, innovation and functionality. We took lamination techniques more usually used in furniture making and applied them at a different scale to create a self-supporting arch structure some 3 stories high, so that when you see the piece from certain vantage points, it reflects the grand proportions of the arch. It was the first time that American red oak had been used structurally. The timber entrance is 3-dimensional and asymmetric, with each timber piece precisely calibrated for optimal structural performance. But it very nearly failed. The complexity of the self-supporting structure demanded extreme logistical analysis of assembly, an aspect that we'd underestimated at the outset of the project. The main entrance to the V&A should have been closed for just 4 days, but instead it took 2 weeks for installation. The V&A, however, remained incredibly patient and supportive of our ambitions. They appreciated that our concept pushed aesthetics and technologies to their limits. And sometimes, it's good to divert an inconvenience. It stops people in their tracks and it makes them look harder at things. After the scaffolding came down, everyone forgot about the inconvenience, and our piece became a huge talking point. The V&A even tried to persuade us to keep it up for longer. But for me, the power of something can be greater if it has a limited lifespan. Our obsession with ceramics at the V&A led to a project that encapsulates for me the joy, the dangers, and even the addictiveness and the necessity of risk. The ceramic table is probably one of the most ambitious pieces of research we've ever undertaken, yet it's for one of our smallest projects. It's a piece that challenges perceptions of ceramics' materiality and structure, history and modernity, form and function. We didn't realise that as we undertook research to understand and to challenge the potential of ceramics, that we'd set out on a journey where each new discovery fueled a desire to continue examining the material's capabilities. As we chased perfection, the ceramic table became as much a story about the process of making and the uniqueness of ceramics as the piece itself. A seemingly impossible piece that combines incredible strength and visual fragility, the ceramic table embodies an everyday item with new meaning. It articulates the structural performance of ceramics to make an exquisitely beautiful yet functional object. Its reductive silhouette is a product of both advanced technologies and artisanal craft, mathematics and design. The contradiction of a piece of furniture made of something so vulnerable creates an outline that deceives us of its actual strength. The ceramic table is born of research and development, stretching back into the ceramics history and into its future. Ceramic's past often overshadows its enduring modernity and utility at the frontiers of space, nuclear energy and biomedicine. The final table is crafted in sintered silicon carbide, an incredibly dense ceramic used by the medical and aerospace industries for its great molecular strength. We collaborated with Boustec, a company based in the south of France. Renowned within the ceramics and aerospace industry for the fabrication of the Herschel Space Observatory mirror, they were nonetheless willing to invest their time in our tiny project to extend the boundaries of this material in new ways. The table is the product of a complex combination of digital tools and artisanal craft, intuition and innovation. To express this duality, we revived the traditional technique of using a crackle glaze, applying it to a high-tech ceramic for the very first time. Pairing the two questions the material's history and modernity, but it's the accidents of history and experimentation that move things forward. Crackle glaze dates back to the Song dynasty in China, a technique that was the result of an accident in the kiln. Realizing the delicacy and complexity of this accidental effect, ceramicists in the 13th century devised a way to reproduce it intentionally. In parallel to our work with Boustec, we found a small enamel company to develop a glaze that could be applied to such high-tech ceramics, pioneering a process that had never been attempted before. The outcome was a crackle glaze that somehow speaks of the molecular structure of the material beneath it. After 18 months of research with our French collaborators, drawing on developments and skills spanning almost 1,000 years, we arrived at the end of our self-imposed logic. The perfected piece was placed inside the kiln for its final firing, but a plate in the kiln became dislodged and smashed the table into 100 pieces. It was an unforeseeable accident that caused irrevocable damage to the table. It was a massive blow for us and for our collaborators, but one that in time will become part of the mythology of the work's creation. In fact, the story of its creation will be featured in an exhibition at the Royal Academy of Arts curated by the ceramicist Edmond de Waal later this year. As the author A.S. Byatt says of ceramics, it is chemistry and alchemy at once. The process of making pots is both precise and uncertain. There is always an element of hazard in what happens in the fire. Prototype number 6 became the closest we've yet come to a final piece. It's the product of many months of trial and error and of failing, and then of failing better. It still has a way to go before we arrive at the end of our self-imposed illogic, but we are determined to reach that end. Sometimes we need to push ourselves to do different things. In September last year, we opened Tin Can, a pop-up restaurant in London's Soho, serving only tinned fish. It's now part of who we are, and we're currently looking at taking it to New York, Copenhagen and Greece. The risk, of course, was that we'd fail in our new venture, having never run a restaurant before, but it worked and generated massive publicity, more than we've ever had for a building, and we had fun. We turned the humble tin into an object of desire, and then we designed a light to showcase the new wafer-thin OLED technology, something we're now going to produce and market ourselves. So of course this brings us to our latest commission and our first ever in Australia, MPavilion. We've had great support from Naomi Milgram, a patron who really wants to make a difference. And as you'll have seen, boat building is one of our obsessions. So again, we'll be collaborating with high-tech yacht technologists to create a pavilion that moves with the wind. In architecture, there's always tension between integrity, function and beauty. I was reminded of this tension by a small exhibition on the life and work of one of the great engineers of our time, the late Peter Rice, who I had the privilege of working with. Rice was a director of Arup and made a vital contribution to the engineering of the Sydney Opera House. Arup Melbourne and London are also working with us on MPavilion. Many years ago, Peter gave a lecture in which he talked about an essay by W.H. Auden on Shakespeare's Othello. Auden argued that Iago is the prototype for scientific man. Rice went on to describe the dangers that architects and engineers face. By being merely pragmatic, using only rational thought, desperate to know whether what we do is right, by being Iagos, in other words, we destroy the very basis upon which the good or noble things in our life exist. Rice's claim is both poetic and true. Pushing the limits of what is possible is what drives us as designers. But when your client is a public body, it's far from straightforward. The constraints are real and sometimes surreal. Decision-making structures at the V&A are Byzantine in their complexity. So it takes time to assure the stakeholders that the risks in a scheme are noble and therefore worth taking. But time on a project is not infinite, and so we have to have an unshakable belief that collectively we have the ability to solve problems that we don't even know exist. Using our powers of persuasion to advance the debate through research is all part of the complex process of design, and it's this that gives me a sense of purpose as an architect. It's how we should reclaim and begin to celebrate risk in architecture. Thank you.